I'm Peter Cook from London. You have to understand that I'm a very particular kind of animal, both politically and in my general opinions. I'm what I would call a creative cynic. I'm an old person and I've seen a lot of not very good things happen. On the other hand, I was privileged as a child to have free education and free college. I don't see things in the extremely black and white. I think there are variants on the not quite right and variants on the nearly possible. And so I think even in the Archigram days, my projects were actually based upon a kind of liberal tradition. Although the mechanics looked outrageous, perhaps, the actual society that I was imagining into them was what I would call a North European liberal society, such as I actually grew up in. I'm of course dismayed that there is a tendency away from that. And my great belief in Europe, which I did before there was even an EU, was that one had seen all these countries fighting each other. I was a child in the wartime, and I heard bombs dropping, and you saw all these countries coming together, and that seemed wonderful, irrespective of whether there was a bureaucracy or not a bureaucracy. So in a way, I think also the architecture that I make is based upon an optimism. Optimism with a side knowing that it won't quite happen, but not saying, oh, all is terrible, or all is terrible, or all is wonderful. I say, yeah, it's going to be a bit better or a bit worse. That, of course, is a very English attitude, that we're survivors. It's interesting that when sometimes there are these economic downturns, for example, in Spain, when there was the last economic downturn, everybody said, oh my God, it's all collapsing, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? The English said, yeah, it's not so good, but it'll get better. And then when things are good in England, they say, oh, any minute it's going to go down. And it's a kind of protective tissue, which is very funny for foreigners. And my wife is not English, and she can never understand how we have this. We're never totally optimistic, and we're never totally pessimistic. We say, well, let's keep going, and something will turn up. And you have to put my architecture into that perspective. It's what I would call liberal in the traditional sense of liberal. It's acquisitive, it's reasonable, it's to the left but not extreme left. It's beneficial for the underprivileged, but not in an extreme way. It uses the economic system that we have, as long as it doesn't go extremely badly. And I think this is difficult, particularly for Latin people or Mediterranean people, to understand. They say, well, surely what turns you on? What makes you happy? You can use your imagination, of course. And I think that when I was doing the Archigram stuff, for instance, I always thought it could be built. If you looked at it, it had handrails, it had toilets, and the toilets were the right size and the escalators were the right pitch. I always used to get irritated by people from other cultures who would say, this is a wonderful scheme, this is the city of the future. And you thought, how the fuck can you walk around on it? You're going to fall off the edge. So you have to bear that in mind, and therefore I don't see any dividing line between what I was showing before lunch there, which is actually built, the blue thing, and what I was drawing in Archigram. That looks a bit unusual in an English university, but it's only what we were doing in Archigram. An Archigram looked a bit unusual, but actually it could have been built. And that was what was for me, very interesting when I built the Graz building, that you could do that, and yet people for years had been saying you couldn't do our kind of stuff, and then you say, fuck you, look, there it is. What do you do then? And I think it's so that in a way, from this rather cynical background, you kind of, you somehow can do things, because the cynicism is a protective crust for what is fundamentally optimism.